Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Hahn. Thank you for joining the Monday afternoon webinar series. Today, we're going to be discussing co-teaching to increase student achievement. So now, what I'd like to do is turn the meeting over to Charlene Maher, Marketing Manager for Diversity, Exceptional Education, Counseling, and Professional Learning at Corwin Press, to introduce our presenters today.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on co-teaching to increase student achievement. My name is Charlene Maher, and I am a marketing manager at Corwin. I'm very pleased to introduce today's presenters, Dr. Richard A. Villa and Dr. Jacqueline Bowsen, who are two of the nation's leading experts on co-teaching and inclusive practices. Dr. Richard A. Villa is an internationally known expert on the development of support systems for educating all students in general education. He is president of Bay Ridge Consortium, Inc. He has served as a middle and high school social studies and science teacher, special education teacher, Title I teacher, as well as special education coordinator, director of personnel services, and director of curriculum and instruction. He is the co-author of several best-selling books on co-teaching published by Corwin, including the book A Guide to Co-Teaching, which is now in its second edition. Dr. Jacqueline Bowsen is Professor Emerita at California State University, San Marcos, where she spearheaded the establishment of co-teaching as the clinical practice paradigm for all teacher preparation programs in the School of Education. She is a noted inclusive education advocate who has co-authored books on culturally proficient inclusive schooling, co-teaching, differentiated instruction, and universal design, and many other topics. And she's also a co-author on the book, A Guide to Co-Teaching. So welcome, Rich and Jackie.
Thank you. We're pleased to spend the next hour with you, and we'd like to share with you what it is that we hope you accomplish in this hour. First, we're going to take a moment to look at why we're even talking about co-teaching at this point in time. Define co-teaching generally, but then look at the 4 co-teaching approaches. And we have some videos, some new videos for you to view to illustrate a couple of these approaches. Finally, we'll share some tools that help co-teachers communicate with one another, plan efficiently, and help one another understand and clarify their roles.
Well, as Jackie said, we're thrilled to have an opportunity to spend some time with you. And as Jeff said in the introduction, it would be some opportunities for your participation through poll everywhere questions. So with respect to that first objective, why co-teach? How many different rationale or reasons can you think of as to why we should be co-teaching? We're going to transition to the poll everywhere question, and it'll focus on what are the rationale for co-teaching. So you should see that box over there on your right, and you can make your choice, A, B, C, D, or E. Well, the poll has ended, so we do have some results. And it looks like 62% of you have said that it is all of the above, and 31% had said that it was none of those answers. Well, our belief is that co-teaching benefits the teachers or the participants in the co-teaching act, personally and professionally. It benefits the students that we teach, not just those that have particular labels. And there are actually even benefits for the system itself in terms of the culture, the climate that we create. There are indeed documented benefits for co-teachers. Co-teaching is a way to help us meet legal mandates. It is a supplemental support, aid, or service that can be brought to a class to support a child rather than require the child to go to a more restrictive environment. So what is this thing, co-teaching?
Okay. Co-teaching is, first of all, two or more people. And we'd like to emphasize that it's people, because some people say, who write in co-teaching, that it's only two professionals. But we know that co-teachers can be general education with special education. It can be two general educators, a teacher with a paraeducator, a teacher co-teaching with his or her students, or even family volunteers in the classroom. So it's two, and notice also more. It does not have to simply be two. What are they doing? Well, they're sharing responsibility for instruction, and as you know, instruction is not just showing up in the classroom, but it involves planning and reflection, looking at student data, and also looking at how one another are interacting with one another in their co-teaching partnership. And finally, it's for the purpose of making sure that all of the students have access to the curriculum. And it's not my students or your students. Students who are primarily eligible for special education, students eligible for special education, EL learners, whoever is in the classroom, they are all of our students for whom we're differentiating instruction. We will be giving you some information about how each of the four co-teaching approaches are similar and different. And so we know that you don't have a graphic organizer in front of you, but if you have a computer, a device, a piece of paper, a pencil, you might want to quickly create this graphic organizer so that you can memorialize some of our conversation with you tonight. You'll see that there is the definition, which is what is common to the four co-teaching approaches, but you'll see that there are each of the four approaches: supportive, parallel, complementary, and team. And for each of these approaches, there are advantages and there are cautions that we want to make sure that you are aware of so that you can avoid falling into some of the traps that can happen.
So sometimes it's helpful to use metaphors or analogies. So how would you come up with this analogy? Co-teaching is like a... We've gotten some very interesting responses for this sometimes. However, the one that we tend to hear most often is that co-teaching is like a marriage or a committed partnership. In what ways is it like a marriage or a committed partnership? Well, it's not always going to be 50-50. It takes time to establish a relationship. It takes work to maintain that relationship. From time to time, there may be differences, and you may even find that you need a marriage counselor. In many schools that we have worked with, we've helped them establish ways to mentor and support co-teachers. So sometimes we pair new co-teachers with veteran co-teachers. So the old married couple can help the newlyweds through the difficult times. In some places, that responsibility is taken over by coaches who are trained to observe, facilitate reflection, debrief. And then sometimes that responsibility falls to a department chair or to an administrator. As Jackie said, we'd be looking at four predominant approaches to co-teaching. They all have a time, they all have a place. They all have their advantages, their cautions, etc. So let's look at supportive co-teaching to begin. Many people start with supportive co-teaching as they get used to one another, the children, the curriculum, and the routines. Basically, what you have here is one person takes a lead role for instructing the large group, and the other person or persons are out and about among the students. They're providing support. That support can take many different forms. It could be related to academics or behavior. It can be cues and prompts. It can be proximity control. They may be distributing or collecting information. They might be doing some progress monitoring or collecting data as well. Advantages are that that person who is in support gets to see things that's not readily noticeable by the person who's leading a large group instructional lesson. Now, it also is important to understand that who's in lead and who's in support doesn't have to be static. They can be switching those roles. What we see here is that people who do not have common planning time, or they have it but they don't hold it sacred, they tend to rely heavily on supportive co-teaching. While we think that it has its benefits, we also think there are clear cautions about this. Now, one of those cautions is avoiding becoming hovercraft or becoming Velcroed like a para-educator to a student. Students tell us that if an adult is Velcroed to a peer, it becomes a barrier to their desire to socially interact with that child. Our primary responsibility is to facilitate independence. Some students, of course, aren't able to be independent, but then we should foster peer-to-peer interdependence before an adult is involved. And if a child does need adult support, it should never come from just one member of the team. Remember the definition. It's shared responsibility for all. If we have a person Velcro to an individual or just certain students in the class, we're still stigmatizing those students. And the message is that they're not really a member of our class. If we have a member of the co-teaching team who's always in that supportive role, the students may not perceive them to be a real teacher. We also worry that it doesn't use the expertise. So say, for example, we had a co-teaching partnership of a special educator and a general education teacher. If that special educator were always in that supportive role, one might ask, where is the special education? Special education, by definition, is specially designed instruction. Just going around making sure everyone's on the same page isn't specially designed instruction. Or putting that person in the role of always managing classroom behavior, basically becoming the discipline police. Sometimes within co-teaching arrangements, if one is always in lead and the other is in support, you may get resentment among the members of your co-teaching team. The classroom teacher might feel that they have an undue burden to plan, to teach, to assess, to grade. And the interventionist or other co-teaching partner might feel that their skills are not being utilized. We believe that you should use all four core co-teaching approaches. We think ultimately the one that should be least utilized is supportive co-teaching. When we look at the literature that is critical of co-teaching sometimes, they're saying there isn't much of an effect size. If you read the description of what they're doing in the name of co-teaching, it's always the supportive co-teaching. As we said, there's a time and a place for it, but it is the one that will yield the least compared to the other approaches.
So, what is an alternative to supportive co-teaching? Parallel co-teaching. Parallel co-teaching is when every individual in the classroom who's in an instructional role is responsible for a subset of the students in the classroom. So parallel co-teaching is, as is illustrated in this photograph here, two or more people working with subsets, different groups of students in different sections of the classroom. And there may even be students who are working independently at in areas and groups in the classroom that have been taught the procedures and know what they're supposed to be doing, and they don't have to have an adult directly instructing or monitoring them. It may be that the instructors, co-teachers rotate among the groups, or the students rotate. The great thing about parallel co-teaching is that there are so many ways in which we can parallel co-teach. Here are a simple list of a few. You might have two co-teachers splitting the class to read, and perhaps one of the co-teachers is more proficient in supporting English learners. They might be teaching the same thing, or they might be teaching different parts of a lesson and then rotate the students so that they reduce the ratio of students in their groups. We're very familiar, particularly elementary school teachers, with station teaching and learning centers, where either the students or the teachers rotate. We might put students in lab groups or cooperative groups, and one co-teacher might monitor half of those groups and the other monitor the others, and then switch to make sure that they both have their eyes on all students and both have access to all students. We might even cluster students according to their strengths. Perhaps some students learn best visually or kinesthetically or auditorily. And then, of course, we may have students where we differentiate our instruction, where some students may, through our data collection, we've identified need supplementary instruction or perhaps even extension of their learning. Are there cautions? Of course. But before we take a look at cautions, what might be some advantages or benefits of parallel co-teaching? And we're not going to poll here or chat, but if you would just take a moment and think. There are different adults working with smaller groups of students within the classroom. What might be the advantages or benefits? All right, let's see what teachers have told us. Because we're working with a subset of students, we have decreased the student-teacher ratio, so we're much more able to monitor students, to adjust our instruction in the moment. We can do data collection, provide more individualized feedback for students, and of course, the benefit is that you can differentiate across the groups that are being supported by each of the co-teachers. Let's think about our Common Core standards and the emphasis on student dialogue and collaboration. Well, this creates that opportunity for students to do that and use all of that academic language that we are expecting them to learn and use. And to counter the issue, the caution of supportive co-teaching, where one person who's in the support role doesn't really get to use all of their expertise, well, now every single person is in an instructional role. And we are less likely to have that experience that may occur in supportive co-teaching where the person in the support role isn't really viewed as a teacher. So parallel co-teaching, lots of options, particularly when we're looking at response to intervention, multi-tiered systems of support. We absolutely need parallel co-teaching when we are regrouping students to do focused instruction for students. Now, for the cautions. Think about it. We're grouping students. What could happen? What we know from the research, and this is a meta-analysis that was done a while ago that looked at the studies that had been done up to that point that looked at grouping and found a number of factors. And one factor that came out of this meta-analysis was that when students are systematically or primarily grouped homogeneously, we can actually decrease student performance by up to 23 percentage points with very little, negligible positive effects for other students. Who in times of high stakes assessment can afford for us through our practices, our grouping practices, to have this occur for students? So a caution is homogeneously grouping. So we know that if we homogeneously group students on a routine basis, we can create this bluebird versus crow stigmatization kind of situation. The kids know. And the other thing is if only one teacher is working with one subset of the students, that student may not actually, that co-teacher may not actually be viewed as one of the teachers, as a teacher of all of the students within the group. So we want to make sure all co-teachers get their eyes on and get the opportunity to work with all students. And finally, if we're monitoring groups, such as we monitor labs or cooperative group learning, we want to make sure that we have a conversation prior to the monitoring to determine who's going to monitor whom. Because if both co-teachers just follow one another around the room and intervene. We can actually have over-intervention, or we might have some groups who actually don't get enough eyes on them by their co-teachers. So a good practice is to have a conversation about who's going to monitor which groups, and then make sure that you switch so that the students benefit from both of your expertise and you both have the opportunity to get your eyes on all of the students.
So it's important here to understand, of course, we're not saying that you cannot have a group of students for remediation or a group of students for extension or enrichment. What we are saying is you should never be grouping students simply because they share a common label. And placement in a group is never a life sentence. It is fluid, it is flexible, it is data-based, and we group, regroup for a variety of purposes, and for the majority of time, they're in heterogeneous mixed ability grouping. The third approach to co-teaching is called complementary co-teaching. And it's called complementary co-teaching because about once every 5 minutes you look at your colleague and you say things like, nice hair, great shoes, you're the smartest person I ever worked with. Well, there's nothing wrong with publicly and frequently complimenting each other, although we would rather have you publicly, frequently compliment your students. But that kind of compliment is different than what we are talking about, because the compliment where you're giving the positive feedback would have an I after the L, and here we see an E. So therefore, it is something different. It is to complete, to bring together, to supplement, to facilitate access for students. So, you know, there are many, many ways that this can be done. One is may have greater curriculum content mastery at the moment, or you may just decide you are going to primarily deliver the content, but I'm going to do things that are going to facilitate access. So you remember perhaps in the beginning, Jackie shared with you a graphic organizer and had said you didn't have it in front of you, but it might be a wonderful way to understand similarities, unique features, differences, and cautions. Well, if I had a co-teacher who was not as knowledgeable as Jackie or I are about co-teaching, they might say, what's your primary objective for this part of the lesson? And we would say that they understand the similarities, differences, and cautions. Well, they would have created a graphic organizer like that, and they would have passed it out, explained it, and during teaching, they would have modeled note-taking. So the development, the explanation, the modeling is complementary because it's increasing likelihood that students are going to get it, to understand. They could provide additional visual supports. They could provide additional examples, analogies. They could develop sentence frames, anchor charts, pre-teach, idioms, figurative language, words for a word wall. So they're using their skill in facilitating access to enhance the instruction to make it more likely that the students are going to be successful. Now, let's look at a clip. We're going to show you a clip from a school in San Diego, Mann Middle School. And Mann Middle School is a school that was not meeting AYP, adequate yearly progress for students with disabilities. And so they contacted Jackie and they asked her if she could work with them to redesign how they were providing supports to students with disabilities. So they stopped doing pull-out in language arts and math, and they went to co-teaching. And she did a lot of work with them on differentiation as well. They needed a 9-point increase to meet AYP, but in 1 year, they had an 89-point increase for that subpopulation of students. We're certainly not suggesting that every school every year is going to see such gain, but what we're saying is that there's tremendous potential if we do this and we do this well. So you're about to meet Stephen and Stephanie. As you meet them, they're new to co-teaching. They're in their first co-teaching marriage, if you will. They've only been together for 6 weeks. There are 38 students in the class who speak 6 different primary languages, and 7 of the 38 students have IEPs. We'd like you to try to identify all the things that you can that you see as complementary, enhancing the instruction. it worked great during the rehearsal. So Jeff, do you want to take over and share from your computer?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Thank
Give me
you.
1 second, and we'll play this in 1 second, and I'll give it back to you when we're done with it.
Thank you, sir. You're a gentleman.
He answered either one. One is measurement or one doesn't need to measure, and this is how we'll write these down. And I would prefer that you write them down as well, so that way.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. So, what did you see that was complementary in that clip? Well, let me ask you this. What is the number we are always trying to get back to? And I'll bet many of you said 0. He said that, but she did many things that...
Richard,
Yes.
if you could share your desktop again, that'd be terrific.
Thank you, Jeff. And how are we doing now? We're there. Okay, so the number we're always trying to get back to is 0. And that's a major concept to understand related to absolute value. But Stephanie did many things that brought that concept home. First, she writes it in a nice, beautiful printing. Then she boxes 0. Then she makes the analogy. It's like going to, I could almost hear you say home base. Going to home base. And then she walks over to a student's paper. And on that student's paper, there's a number line. And above 0, she draws a house. So that child has a concrete visual representation. This is where you're always trying to get back to, buddy. This is it. This is home base. She put the prompts on the board in terms of what does it say, what does it mean. She knows those students. She will provide the support that they might need. So for some students, she actually says it and they repeat it because they look like deers in the headlights. For other students, she might point to the what does it say, what does it mean. You may or may not have noticed above the whiteboard that there were chart paper, and she created those visuals, just as she did the words for the word wall. She pre-teaches, posts, and then references that, the vocabulary, the mathematical vocabulary. You may have picked up that she summarized, that she paraphrased. So she did many, many things to make sure that those students were accessing.
Are there cautions?
There are indeed cautions, as there are with any approach to co-teaching. You've got to think about the fact that you're both teaching the whole class. Now, there's a difference. One is still driving content, the other is adding to it, complementing it, facilitating access. But you need to think about your position in the room. You do not need to both be teaching from the front of the room. You don't want to forget to monitor the students. You also have to be concerned about perhaps too much teacher talk. And then there's the issue of stepping on each other's toes. And what we say to our co-teachers is, if you haven't done complementary, in planning, you're never going to script every minute, but begin to plan 2, 3, maybe even 4 times in that lesson. Where would be a complementary moment? So the teacher at that moment who's driving content isn't surprised that this other person is interjecting. And then it becomes much more natural, much more fluid. What we also know is that this takes time, especially for some of our classroom teachers, content teachers, who often tell us, it's a process for them to learn how to let go, to give up some of the control.
Right. I really liked how Stephen taught from the middle of the class so that he could monitor. That was their solution to that monitoring issue. And they also became very good team co-teachers. So team co-teaching. Team co-teaching, if we want to mix metaphors, it's like a marriage or a committed partnership, it also could be like a tango. Now, I've never danced a tango, but I'm looking at these people. How can these people do this? It requires practice, flexibility, cues. So team co-teaching, even though it may look very much like complementary co-teaching, it's actually a little bit different. Both partners are now both facile and are able to facilitate access to the content and also access. So they can switch between being in the content lead and the complementary role very smoothly, as in a good pair of partners. And if they had a new partner, it might not be so smooth and fluid. Team co-teaching is where really 2 people do what one person otherwise would have done alone. And did I disappear? Okay. 2 or more people do what one person did alone, and they could literally finish one another's sentences. And if one person were gone, the other person has learned the differentiation strategies, has learned the content, so they could very easily carry on. Another feature of team co-teaching is that this is where we have that point where we feel that our responsibilities and duties are equitable. We've worked out that decision-making in our partnership. And thirdly, we have, and this could be, of course, true of all of the co-teaching approaches, but we have symbols that represent that we are both teachers, symbols of equity, pieces of paper that go home to the home with students have both of our names on it. Both of our names are on the door. So in team co-teaching, it's that really that place where we have the most requirement for trust, for communication, for planning, and we want to caution that we never stay in team teaching the whole time, because our ultimate goal is to monitor and adjust which of the co-teaching approaches we use based upon the content demands, based upon the students that we're teaching, and we really want to fluidly and will, in the course of an hour a day, move in and out of all of the co-teaching approaches. Are there cautions to team co-teaching? Well, of course. And because you're both still in the instructional role, you're both in front of the students, team co-teaching holds the same cautions as complementary co-teaching. We have to remember that when we're so excited in our interaction that we still have students, that we are monitoring students. We're not out and about like in supportive. We don't have a smaller subgroup of students like in parallel co-teaching. We need to make sure that we attend to ensure that there's more student talk than teacher talk, because we, in fact, do like to talk a lot. And as Rich mentioned, we want to have signals so that we invite one another to jump in and complement, and so that we don't feel as if we're stepping up on one another's toes. And in team co-teaching, this is really, really where we have let it go, and are exchanging the lead and the complementary roles. Do we have an example of team co-teaching?
We have a wonderful clip of a kindergarten class that has a small number of students, 50 students. And as you look at this clip, try to figure out if they are truly dancing a tango like that picture showed. If they, no. Jeff, my boy, it's gonna go back to you. I've lost the control of the video. The teachers are from Wheeling, Illinois.
Richard, would you like me to start it now?
Please, sir.
You got it.
The things that you can find in the lost and found. So, was that team co-teaching? What's the true test? There was Erica and Christian. Who was the kindergarten teacher? And who was the English language development teacher? The bilingual teacher. Well, if you said to yourself, I have no idea, then that has been the test of true team co-teaching. In fact, Erica was the kindergarten teacher and Christian was the Spanish bilingual teacher. So now that you have had an opportunity to learn about each of the 4 co-teaching approaches, let's poll again.
So here, if you've been a teacher, we want you to answer it from that perspective. If you are an administrator and you're working with a variety of co-teachers in your school, what are they primarily doing? So we are at a poll everywhere question. And Jeff, we're going to turn it over to you. All right, we've got our results. So look at all the people who've used all 4 approaches. And a lot of people are doing supportive, and a lot of people have done at least 3 of the 4. So good for all of you. And our challenge, of course, is to have you set goals for yourself, challenge yourself, so you continue to develop the repertoire. And as Jackie said earlier, all 4 approaches are important. All 4 approaches we want you to moving in and out of, but ultimately the goal should be to do supportive the least. So now we want to share with you some tools that we think should be part of your co-teaching toolbox. And, you know, this webinar is going to be archived, so you can come back and look at things. But this first one is sort of the nuptial or the prenuptial conversation, if you will. Because if co-teaching is like a marriage, there are certain things we need to discuss. And the sooner we discuss them, the healthier our team is going to be. You should share with each other the strengths you bring to the team. You should share with each other the concerns, the worries, the fears you might have about co-teaching. And then in these other categories, we think you should spend time saying, what do we need to talk about under this category? So for example, time for planning. That'll be the when do we meet, where do we meet, how long do we meet, how often do we meet, etc. If you take a category like communication, well, with whom do you need to communicate? With each other, of course, but what about with the students, with the parents, with the family? So what each co-teaching team identifies under these categorical headings could be very different. Marilyn Friend, a colleague and also author on co-teaching, would say all co-teaching teams really need to discuss pet peeves. What is it that, for you is something that really kind of irks you? Because we don't know that information. We could be annoying or upsetting each other without trying to do so. So once you've done that, then you need to come to an agreement. So here's another kind of matrix that can be created. You would list the responsibilities that must be met for students of mixed ability in a classroom. And then you'd put the names of the members of the co-teaching teams, be it 2, 3, 4. And we'd like to have a code here. So if you think this person has primary responsibility, you'd put a P under their name next to the responsibility. If you think they have secondary, it would be S, equal E. If they want input into it, then I. In some instances, there might be some responsibilities, let's say with a paraeducator, that would be not applicable, so be NA. P, S, E, I, N, A. Our best advice on how to use this tool: develop the list of responsibilities together, then go away from one another, and under the names, from your perception of the world, who has those responsibilities? You want to find out if you're really on the same page? Or perhaps maybe you do need that marriage counselor to help facilitate the conversation.
After spending 10 minutes each afternoon in front of a full-length mirror, Alan still isn't sure why self-reflection is so important to effective teaching. Well, we know how in teaching reflection is so important. Well, the same is true for co-teachers. And so we've developed a tool to help co-teachers reflect upon how they're, and the frequency with which they are using each of the 4 co-teaching approaches. This is a co-teaching tracking matrix that co-teachers have developed and used it in a variety of ways. You could, at the end of the week, reflect upon which of the co-teaching approaches you used and then set some goals. It may be that you're stuck in supportive or you're stuck in parallel. And from a database approach, you say, come on, we need to really step it up and try some of that complementary. You also could use this as a planning tool so that you achieve that goal that we are hoping you all will have, which is use all of the 4 co-teaching approaches, remembering that the supportive is to be the least used. An additional tool that actually has been developed at California State University, San Marcos, where I'm a faculty member, is this one. And we went to training our supervisors, our teacher candidates, and our cooperating teachers in co-teaching several years ago, and the candidates and the cooperating teachers actually came up with this planning tool. What the tool does is prompts us to have a conversation first, of course, about what we're going to be addressing in terms of our content standards and how we're going to do it. And we noticed that when co-teachers plan, they tend to do it in blocks. The first 10-minute block, the next 15-minute block. So you see this is broken into blocks. So you can actually complete this and fill it out, or you can use it as a visual prompt to have the conversation. So after you talk about content and instructional approaches, then this prompts us to really look at differentiated instruction, to have conversations about our students, what materials, what differing objectives, what different assessment systems may be needed to actually have us identify what our students actually know. And then we have the column where we're very as deliberate about which co-teaching approach we're going to use during that block as we are about how we're teaching that content. And you'll see the columns, if one person is doing this, the other person could be doing that. So this has also been a very efficient planning tool without having to do an elaborate lesson plan.
So we'd like you to take a moment and think about these tools that we've shared with you. And is there one that if you were to think of the teams that you're with, that would be most beneficial for you right now? Certainly, we would love to see you use all of them. And we think they're tools that should be used multiple times throughout the year because we may forget our agreements or our answers change. But what tool would be most helpful for you? This nuptial conversation tool, the nuptial agreement, clarification of roles and responsibilities and expectations, the tracking matrix, where you can look at what percentage of the time you're using each of the approaches and set goals, or a lesson planning form. So Jackie presented it as being done with a cooperating teacher and a teacher candidate, but it could also be done by any pair of co-teachers. We're going to do our last poll everywhere related to which tools could be most beneficial for you. The nuptial conversation, the nuptial agreement, the co-teaching tracking matrix, or the planning organizer. Look at that. So this is kind of consistent to what we normally see. Different teams find different ones, and you know, we didn't give you all of the above, but good for you. All right, thank you for sharing that with us. So there are many questions that come up. Who can co-teach? But Jackie addressed this in the beginning. Everyone can co-teach. It can be to gen ed teachers, it can be various interventionists like English language learning specialists, special educators, those who work with students identified as gifted and talented, teacher librarians, para-educators, students themselves. Co-teaching will not eliminate pullout. There will always be a need, but what we should be asking ourselves before we ever do pull out is, what are we doing that couldn't be done for a student in a co-taught differentiated classroom? So we should try to do the co-teaching in that Tier 1 core instruction first. How many students with IEP should be in a co-taught class? Authors of co-teaching vary with this, but no one has ever suggested going over a third. The ideal would be to mirror your natural proportion, and very few people could do that. But with developing co-teachers, you should be moving closer to that natural proportion, maybe 5 to 6% above it over time, rather than you know, having more, but never ever more than a third. Co-teachers should stay together. Most authors would say at least 2 years. There are advantages if you stay together. There's the advantage if someone loops with the students, but it should be the students and their needs that drive whether we stay together or we follow our students. We do know that as we move into secondary, what we tend to do is see people stay together much longer. That's because of the rigor of the curriculum. And of course, our co-teachers do not need to have the same level of content expertise, but as we work together, my content expertise will expand and your access skills will expand. So I've seen that there are a couple of questions that appeared here in the chat box, and it relates to the tools. And the tools that we shared would be in the book, A Guide to Co-Teaching, the first of our Corwin books listed here. There's a variety of additional resources and tools like that in that book. And related to our topic, we have our Guide to Co-Teaching with Paraeducators. We believe that co-teachers need to do more than just learn to play nicely together. We believe that the goal is for them to collaborate and differentiate instruction. And that is another of our Corwin publications. We're very excited by the collaborating with students in instruction and decision-making, because it looks at students in cooperative learning groups as peer tutors, trained peer tutors, as actually co-teaching. We have schools, high schools we have worked with where we've up to 50 high school students who take a 3-credit course, and then they're co-teaching with adults across grades 9 through 12. But this book also looks at their role in peer mediation and part of the discipline system. And most exciting for us is the new PD resource around co-teaching that is going to be launched very soon and available. If you look at the bottom of this slide, you will see that there is a place where you can go visit, and you can actually get a free trial. This slide, this resource has hundreds of ideas for how you can facilitate professional development and training. You have numerous videos for each of the co-teaching approaches, but you also have video footage that explains its approach, that looks at the role of administrators in promoting and sustaining co-teaching, that looks at how you mesh planning, advice from co-teachers, like those old married couples, if you will, for the newlyweds. So we strongly encourage you to go visit this. Okay? All right. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Charlene.
All right. Thank you, Rich and Jackie, for the presentation.
Well,
And thank you, everybody, for coming and joining us today. We hope you find this presentation helpful, and we will be sending a copy of the PowerPoint slides and a recording of this webinar to everyone after the webinar via email. So for more information about co-teaching resources and professional learning options, please visit us at corwin.com. And we hope you will join us next week at the same time for the next webinar in our Monday afternoon webinar series, where we will explore how connectedness empowers learning with Thomas Whitby and Stephen Anderson. So we hope to see you then. Thank you again for joining us, and have a good evening.